children's and adult classes, as well as all the other offerings in the community. I'd love to introduce you to Jodi Connelly. Jodi Connelly is an artist out of Sacramento that has created this beautiful meditative space that you see here in the main gallery. So everyone give a nice warm welcome.
Everyone who helped with installation. I really appreciate that you trusted me with your space and invited me to recreate this work. This work began as a project that I was invited to do in 2022 in Sacramento by a curator named Faith McKinney. It was a group of 4 curators in Sacramento that came together and invited artists to transform a space that was going to be demolished in Sacramento. So a lot of my work is very site-specific and deals with concerns of the environment. And it wasn't always the case. When I started out as an undergrad, my work was mostly figurative, charcoal drawings, and then large-scale work on landscapes, but mostly it was figurative, and I was also a painter. So I did that for a long time, and then at a certain point, I got tired of selling my work in galleries and kind of living up to this expectation of what people thought my work should look like, or what was marketable, or what was going to sell. And it kind of ruined it for me for a while, and I had a little bit of an existential crisis about who I was as an artist and what I wanted to make. And so I took about a 10-year hiatus from art making, and I was in the Peace Corps. I traveled around Latin America, and then when I came back to the United States from the Peace Corps, I really wanted to work with at-risk communities and with the arts. And completely by accident, found myself moving to Brooklyn to take a job as a teaching artist. And I ended up working there for about 10 years and making work with kids and teenagers and starting up a whole bunch of programming in Brooklyn and Queens. And it wasn't until after I went through this decade of service through the arts that I really felt the need to return to a more full-time studio practice. So in 2015, I went to Brandeis in Massachusetts and did a post-bac program and basically reinvented myself as an artist. I knew that I still wanted to maintain some of the formal practices of drawing and painting, but I wasn't really sure what my relationship was to that practice anymore. And I was playing with some salt and that you use to melt ice on the sidewalks, and I started dumping it on my drawings, ink drawings, because I really wanted to lose control of what I thought it was to make a piece of art. And that just opened the world wide open for me. And I started working with burying drawings and then digging them up and reworking them. And there was some really ugly work that came out of that time. It wasn't all successful. It was a lot of experimentation and figuring things out. And in some ways, it was kind of a struggle, because I think anytime we're growing or trying to change something or learn something new, it's really hard. So I was accepted to UC Davis for graduate school a year later, and it was the only school on the West Coast that I chose. And I decided to come out here because I really wanted to just shake everything out, like turn it completely upside down, give up my East Coast ways for a while and see what would happen. And one of the big appeals for me was that there was a lot of land. So UC Davis has tons of land holdings all over California in all kinds of habitats. And I fell in love with, of all places, this place up in the Coast Range that is a serpentine environment. So it's very inhospitable soil to most plants, and it's very rugged and hot, and there was something about it that just really called to me. So I started working in the land, and I was very curious, because as someone who didn't grow up in California, I really wanted to know what everything was. And then I learned that 90% of the grasses in California are non-native or invasive. And I was like, whoa, what is this? How did this happen? And then I went into a very deep historical rabbit hole of the history and ecology of California, which I won't torture you with today, but which resulted in a real deep curiosity about what this land looked like 400 years ago, before colonization, before mining, before Europeans kind of infiltrated the area. And I researched native plants, and I decided to bring together my drawing practice and this new idea of reimagining or the landscape as it was before. And I cut a 600-foot line in a hill, and I weeded it, and I planted native plants. And all the biologists in this field station thought I was completely crazy, because their research plots are like 6 feet by 6 feet. And they're like, how is this ever gonna work? And I was like, I don't know. And it didn't. But it would have if I'd had 7 years to work on my thesis. And there have been changes along that line. But that really, I was hooked. I loved the soil, I loved the plants, I loved being out on the land. And so all of my work since then has really been about our impact on the environment, and then how my relationship to this place has grown and changed and evolved. So this particular work, like I said, was born in Sacramento, and the soil on these pieces is from the farm that I lived on in grad school. And then in the original piece, the soil that went around it was from our neighborhood where we bought our first home together, me and my husband. So, and the soil was full of cat poop. And even though I sieved it all out, I think there was still some left because all these flies hatched out of it. Which was kind of interesting, because I'm talking about, and part of this work is about my sense of place and exploring what it means to live here and what it means to be a human in our environment and to take things from the earth and to ask the question, what are we giving back? What are we taking? What are we giving? How do we live in balance? What happens when we're not in balance with our environment, which mostly we're not right now. But I'll come back around to that. But I placed the soil and I mapped out the Sacramento Valley, and I used the altitudes of different areas in the Sierras and the Coast Range to determine the heights of the mountains, these pieces that go around. But that piece was easy because they were tearing the building down, and all I had to do was bring the dirt in and dump it on the floor and leave it. And so when I was invited to do this project and recreate it, I was really excited to work in a more sculptural way with the terrain that goes around the outside, because I couldn't just pour dirt up against the walls. And so I had the opportunity to build these kind of sandboxes, and these pieces, which they're not, I mean, I know the mountains are over there, but this would be east. And these correspond to certain altitudes of the Sierras, and then back here would be certain altitudes of the Coast Range. And so what I did was, when I was looking at Visalia and I was planning this exhibition, I made a box around the valley that would include the mountains in the valley, and then I use certain altitudes to determine the size of each of these pieces. And then obviously, if this were this year's, this would be a wall right here and we wouldn't be able to enter. So it's, a little more poetic than that. There's some entry points. And then the soil is from Visalia. So usually I hand dig everything. That wasn't practical for the scale of this project. So I had them pour it in my truck, and then I had this lowrider for like 2 days. It was like, literally thought it was gonna fly away. It was like, shh. And then it slowly came back to normal as we emptied it out and filled these structures. But for me, this piece is about 2 things. Each altitude of these cloths, well, really 3 things. Each altitude of the cloths in the center correspond to an altitude of a place of personal significance. So this one in the middle is home, because we live in the middle of Sacramento Valley. And then these are parts of the Sierras, and then the Coast Range back here. And they're kind of mixed up now because of the limitations of the beams in the ceiling, but they still hold that kind of significance for me. But the intention is that as we move through life, we see things differently and we perceive things differently as we move through different spaces. And so as you move through this piece, the different horizons of these cloths kind of line up in different ways, just like they might if you're hiking through the landscape or driving through the mountains. You see different things aligning. And so I really like to think of it as a topographical map that is both based in actual places, but also kind of experience and memory. And then I really wanted something you could walk through and re-experience the land in an indoor space. Because for me, land art is one of my biggest inspirations, but it's also often very inaccessible. And so I really want to bring something that feels like land art to more urban spaces so that more people can see it and more people have access to that. And then it evokes that experience of being out in nature in some way. And then the other impetus behind this piece is that I've been really interested in the bare elemental quality of the earth and how these could be perceived either as pregnant or barren. And one of the reasons I like to keep them a little damp is because they do feel like they have the potential to bring forth life or plants rather than being really dry. They would have a very different feeling. And so for me, sitting in this space and just really having this experience with these upright pieces in particular, I want them to relate a little bit to the body so that you're in conversation with them. So as we move through life, we're usually looking down at the ground or we're walking on it. And I think by lifting them up, we're asked to think about what that is that we're walking on, what it is that we're part of, and really relate to it with our bodies and maybe our minds or our hearts. And it's about thinking about how we relate to our surroundings. How do we treat our planet? Like, what are we taking? And then what can we give back so that we can sustain this place for, everyone, for generations to come? Questions?
Please feel free to ask really any questions that might pop into your mind.
Yeah.
I just say it smells so good in here.
Yeah, that's part of it too. It's just the smell. Yeah, for sure. I know I jumped around a little bit. I tried to stay on track, but it's please do let me know if you have questions. And it can be anything. Be like, why? I will say I do not know. Yeah.
A little technical question.
Sure.
We're here a couple minutes late, so I'm not too sure. How was this other part made, these corners?
That's plywood, and then it has an underlayment under the earth. Yeah, the back. And then it's covered with burlap and troweled with wild clay that I gathered. And so it's a really clay-heavy soil. And it works a lot like stucco on a house. You prepare the surface, and then it has a little bit of screen to grab onto, and then you just trowel it on the same way you would trowel stucco. And then I wanted the ends to be square because I like how it looks like a cross section, and how, you know, most of the buildings that we live in and inhabit, the bank, the grocery store, they're all rectangles, but nothing in nature is a rectangle. And so I think it's really interesting to find these natural forms butted up against more human-made forms. So it was a long answer, but
I have, because I've been doing some gardening this week, I was thinking how dirt is about life, and how we plant and we get our fruit and vegetables and life out of the dirt. But it also is about death, because we go back to the earth and death. So I brought that to mind. So.
Absolutely, yeah. And then you could argue that the circle is part of that universal connection. It's planetary, it's cyclical. I think that's a fair read, yeah. Yeah.
Do you have a favorite vegetable?
A favorite vegetable? Well, I was gonna say tomato, but that's a fruit.
Still counts. Tomatoes, okay, cool.
Yeah, so my favorite fruit, fruit-like vegetable is tomato. Anyway,
Question.
yeah.
What, in your opinion, constitutes as a finished piece of artwork?
Sounds like an artist question.
You know, as a student, no, it wasn't a student. It was a younger, up-and-coming artist asked this question recently, and it was on social media, and all these different answers came in, and I was like, all those answers are right. But my answer was, it's done when it's not asking you for anything else. But I don't actually think it's ever done, because I look at this and I'm like, well, I could do that differently, and I'm going to build that differently next time, and I'm going to do this other thing. You know, I think art is, and like life, is always on a continuum. Like once you reach a point, that's not it. You're not done. This isn't finished. You just keep evolving and growing. So on one hand, it's never finished. But I do think that you get to a point where you're like, that's enough for now. And the other time is maybe you ran out of time and you just have to make it work. So, you know, but I think for me, it's like, is it still asking for something, or does it feel resolved for now? And then, of course, it starts asking new questions. But then that's new work. Yeah.
Thoughts, questions?
How would you say that your artwork and yourself internally has changed since you were younger and now that you're older?
Well, I would say it changed a lot. And I don't know, I guess those things co-emerge. I would invite other artists to join in answering this question. I think it's different for everyone. I mean, I think your work changes when you move into a different studio. I think your work changes when you have children, your work changes when you move to a new place, because every experience you have forms what comes out of you. We're kind of like little filters. All of us, artists or not, you're filtering these experiences and the way you move through the world, or the food you learn how to cook, or, you know, like anything. What comes out of you is a relationship with your experience. And, you know, I started off as a painter. I thought that was it. Like, oh, artists are painters. Now I'm like, yeah, that wasn't so right. I mean, they are, but there's more, you know? And I also think that when I lived in New York for 10 years, and I had a lot of anxiety living in the city, and I didn't really realize it until I left. But that pace of life is so fast. And so I started meditating. And I joined a group that meditated. And I think starting to meditate really changed my work. And I do see in this work a lot of Buddhist influence. And so I think as my relationship to myself and my mind and the world changes, my work, all of us change. It's a path. It does not end until you're back under that dirt, I think. And then maybe it keeps going.
Would you keep doing this? Like, would you say this, like, right now? Or do you already plan on doing something differently?
Oh yeah, I'm already working on something else. Well, I told Eric, my husband, I was like, after this is, at some point 2 or 3 months ago, I was like, I'm regretting all of my life choices. I feel like I made this very hard for myself. And he said, you always say that, right, close to the end. And I was like, okay, that's true. And then I told him that I was gonna work with little tiny things and paper. And he said, no, you won't. And I think he's right. But yeah, I have a project that has been floating around for about 5 years that I haven't been able to figure out, and it's made out of paper. So I'm really excited to work with lighter materials for a little while and figure that out. But I'll be back. I mean, you know, I'm pretty sure that all of my ancestors were farmers, and this is like where I belong. So, I mean, most of our ancestors were farmers, really, if you think about it. But, yeah.
Any final thoughts?
More.
Where's all this dirt going when you're done?
Do you want it? The place I bought it from has a place we can leave it. So we're gonna take as much as we can and return it to them. And then the wood pieces will come with me, where they'll be the clay will be reconstituted and put into one of the thousands of buckets that populate our driveway. And yeah, it'll become something else. And I mean, I would love that. You know, I will bring you seeds of native plants, and y'all can come. Maybe we can, I don't know, I don't want to promise anything. It's up to these guys. But, you know, when we do install, if that's something that works for you guys, we can, like, hand you some seeds and some dirt. I love it. So you can have the earth be reborn with a flower, whatever you choose to put in it. Yeah, but seriously, if you want some for your garden, or I wouldn't put this in your garden, no, right? Where's Tracy?
It needs to be amended if you do that.
Yeah, it needs a lot of fluffy compost and some humus. Yeah, this is very sandy. Great for rammed earth if you want to build something out of rammed earth, which, I have a little book. This is a plug for my book, shameless plug. There's a little book about rammed earth here, and if you're interested in building with earth and eco-friendly garden beds or whatever, and then you should check it out.
Jodi's book is available at the Joseph table, so on your way.
Yeah, I totally forgot about the book, but this is perfect for rammed earth. Yeah.
When you paint, what is your favorite medium? Watercolor, oil?
Oh, oil all the way. Yeah.